Hi, everyone. Welcome to Title IX, An Uncertain Future, hosted by the American Association of University Women of New Jersey and Garden State Equality. We are so thankful to have our panelists join us for this, what I think will be a very informational and probably eye-opening conversation. Again, welcome everybody who has joined today. Of course, as usual, we are recording our program, and this will later be available on AUW's website, the New Jersey website, and on our YouTube channel. So to get us started, I'm just going to do a brief overview, a very brief overview of what Title IX actually is, and then we'll dive into that in much more detail with our panelists here. The Title IX ruling comes from a civil rights law passed in 1972, and it was considered a landmark because for the first time it said that there would not be any discrimination on the basis of sex in education. So basically, it said that any educational institution receiving federal assistance would have to provide equal opportunity for all students, regardless of sex. As we know, that has been interpreted in many, many different ways over the years. That is something we will definitely be talking about tonight. I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. First, we have with us Meghan Kissell. Meghan Kissell is the Senior Director of Policy and Member Advocacy at the American Association of University Women. She leads AUW's nonpartisan and mission-driven public policy at the federal level and supports grassroots advocacy work of AUW's membership network. Meghan has more than 20 years of nonprofit policy and issue developing and implementing targeted social impact strategies designed to engage key stakeholders and policymakers to advocate for positive policy outcomes. Prior to joining AUW, Meghan worked on state and local health policy with the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and led efforts to expand LGBTQ equality in the Deep South with the Human Rights Campaign. She also worked for the Conservation Lands Foundation to help lead local and national campaigns in the Western United States, resulting in the successful protection of more than 5 million acres of public land. She was also previously AUW's field director, supporting local advocacy engagement and volunteer get out the vote efforts. Meghan has a master's degree in social work with a focus on community organizing from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree in political science from Allegheny College in Pennsylvania. Our next panelist is Robyn Gigl. Robyn is an attorney, author, and advocate. She is partner at the law firm of Dilworth Paxson LLP in Freehold, New Jersey, where she handles complex commercial and employment litigation. Robyn has been selected by New Jersey super lawyers as one of the top 50 women lawyers and as one of the top 100 lawyers in New Jersey. Robyn is a member of the New Jersey Supreme Court Committee on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, as well as the New Jersey Supreme Court Committee on Wellness in Law. She was appointed by the governor and the legislature to the New Jersey Transgender Equality Task Force and was a member of the board of directors of Garden State Equality, New Jersey's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization from 2012 to 2024. In addition to being an attorney, Robyn is the author of 4 published novels featuring transgender criminal defense attorney Erin McCabe. Her novel, Survivor's Guilt, was named by Time magazine as one of the top 100 mystery and thriller books of all time. Robyn has been honored by the NJ Women Lawyers Association, by AAUW NJ, and the NJ Pride Network for her advocacy work on behalf of the LGBTQ community. Robyn is a graduate of Stonehill College and Villanova University School of Law, where she was a member and associate editor of the Villanova Law Review. With that, I'd like to welcome our panelists and get started. Hi, Megan. Hi, Robin. It's so great to have you here. I am a fan of both of your work and your advocacy on behalf of women, and especially of the LGBTQ community. I think that's something that's really dear to all three of us. So without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to start with some questions, but since there's only three of us, I'm going to keep the conversation going, the flow. I just want to keep it very conversational. I don't really want to have a question answer format, but I'm just going to throw out a few questions just to sort of, give some direction. So my first question is directed at Megan. Just to give a little bit of background on what is Title IX, what does it actually protect, and why do most people think that it only applies to sports?
Well, Anjali, first, I definitely want to thank AUW New Jersey for being a co-host. Really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. And quite frankly, when you first asked me if, you know, about doing this topic, I was like, of course, this is truly one of my favorite topics. And I was a soccer player. I definitely had the benefit of Title IX, and there's a reason people think Title IX is all about sports. But honestly, Title IX was never about sports. But I want to back up, and I'm so glad that you put the actual text of what Title IX is. It's really very simple. And it's taken some very weird directions. This is not the first time we've seen attacks on Title IX, but this is certainly extreme. But I would say that Title IX, quite frankly, is a promise that's made to girls and women in school. It's a promise that they can have equal access to a higher education, career and technical schools. They can have equity if they choose to go into STEM fields. It is a promise that there's not going to be an environment filled with harassment based on sex. So it's done a lot more than open doors on the athletic field. But I will say, even before 2025, it still had challenges. We're still seeing sexual harassment in higher ed, far too rampant on college campuses. Parenting, students who are pregnant and parenting still get pushed out of their school environments. LGBTQ students, the ground keeps shifting about what they can expect from civil rights protections, and that has to be terrifying. So when we're thinking about Title IX, it's absolutely more than sports. It is our promise. And the question that we have in front of that I keep thinking about right now is that what is the promise that we want to keep to younger women and women still in school?
Great. I mean, and I think we want to, again, as you bring up the question of what the future is, right? Talking about younger women and, what we want to keep up as our promise to them. But let's talk a little bit about what does Title IX actually protect? We talked, I think especially the ruling from the Kentucky judge was a lot about, what constitutes sex. And, does that mean or apply to gender? So, Robin, what exactly is, and I do want a lawyerly explanation of this, what exactly is or constitutes sex discrimination? And how does Title IX specifically, relate to gender and its impact on LGBTQ plus students?
Uh, First of all, I too want to thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. And as I said to you earlier, before we came on, if I start crawling too far around the legal weeds, just pull me back. So, I mean, at the basis of Title IX, as Megan said, is a protection against being discriminated against. And that means being treated differently. So having a disparate treatment is the way the law would treat it in terms of your sex, based on your sex. So you're treated differently because of your sex. That would be discrimination. Or if a policy has a disparate impact because of sex. So there's a policy that on its face might look neutral, but it's impacting women differently than it is men. So that would also constitute discrimination. Title IX also protects against sexual harassment. So being, again, not necessarily even quid pro quo. In other words, somebody's coming on to you and trying to have a sexual relationship with you, but just treating you differently in the environment because uh, you know, of your gender, of your sex, and that can be, just being obnoxious, treating you differently, hostile work or hostile environment type of situation. So those are all the things that Title IX protects about. Now, you asked a question specifically about how does Title IX impact the LGBTQ community? And honestly, the answer right now depends on what day of the week it is. I basically 2 months ago, I could have said it depends on who's in the White House, because President Obama issued an executive order at the end of his administration saying that Title IX did protect LGBTQ plus students against being harassed because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. Then in 2017, President Trump came in and he pulled that all back and it went away. In 2020, when President Biden came back in, he put the executive order back in. But President Biden went even further because he started, there's a thing called the Administrative Procedures Act, which when you go through the Administrative Procedures Act, you create federal regulations that have basically the force of law. So they're different than executive orders. Everybody right now is looking at executive orders and assuming that's the law. They're not. They're just pronouncements made by the president. They are not self-enforcing. But what President Biden did was go through the Administrative Procedures Act and have a regulation created that did protect LGBTQ plus students. And that went into effect in August of 2024. Unfortunately, and I don't want to get too far ahead, in January of 2025, a federal judge struck that down as being unconstitutional. The regulation struck it down as being unconstitutional. And then President Trump took office and he has withdrawn any appeals. So as of now, there are some organizations that are appealing that ruling that Title IX has been struck down, but it's questionable as to what will happen. So
So,
go ahead,
yeah,
Megan.
I
and
wanted
you
to
brought up something really interesting. You brought up like the procedure piece, right? I do want to delve into that a little bit further to make that clearer. So I'm going to direct this to Megan. So Megan, when we talk about, the Obama, so actually first, before we even do that, it seems to me one of the other things that Robyn mentioned was the idea of, protections for sexual harassment and assault under Title IX. And that's relatively new. Like, I think, my introduction for frankly was from the movie that I don't know if anybody has seen it. I would highly recommend it, called The Hunting Ground. And it talks about the students started at UNC fighting to have their Title IX rights be recognized under Title IX for assaults that they were subjected to on campus, and then the sort of lack of empathy from the administration in resolving the issue. And then, I'm going to ask Megan to talk about like the difference, the Obama guidance as it was, and what, Trump did, or actually Betsy DeVos did as the cabinet secretary in the first Trump administration and then the Biden administration.
So this is where I was going to piggyback on what Robyn was saying, because without giving too much of a history lesson, understanding what some of that back and forth was, Title IX actually has always been about protecting against sexual harassment and assault. I think what ended up being a bit more new was seeing how it could be applied to book bans of certain books being taken out of classrooms. Are we creating a hostile environment for the individuals who see themselves in the subject matter of the books? Is it, we've heard it applied to sports. Everybody's familiar with that. Never its original intention, never actually written into Title IX. But in this notion that Title IX should be applied to pregnant students, parenting students, those are probably a little bit newer, but a little bit of the history that you were referencing. Yes, the Obama administration had guidance from the Department of Education that said LGBTQ students, and even more specifically, transgender students, were covered with Title IX protections. And Betsy DeVos came in, did the same process that Robyn was describing, came in, went through a very long process, and came up with we always refer to them as the DeVos rules that came out in 2020, that one of the pieces, I won't get too far into down the legal road because Robyn would have much more information on this than I would, but when you think about sexual assault and harassment on a campus, one of the big changes to Title IX that happened in 2020 under the DeVos rules was sexual assault or harassment needed to be both severe and pervasive. That's a really high bar, severe and pervasive. And that was actually one of the important things that when the Biden administration came in, that was a critical piece that actually changed with the 2024 regulations, is that it went back to severe or pervasive. And I think, quite frankly, if a student has experienced sexual assault, they might consider that pretty darn severe. But the schools were dictating whether it was also pervasive. And that's just one of the types of changes that we saw with the DeVos rules really taking a step back under the term at the time was, we were going to talk about due process and the accused rights. And what it did was create a very high bar for the person who'd experienced the incident, subjected folks to it, sometimes like a face-to-face cross-examination. Procedures for investigating Title IX complaints, they were completely different than the procedures for any other kind of complaint on a college campus. And that's what made them so onerous, is that suddenly it was almost that you were assuming this rape myth approach that a woman must be, primarily women, and the woman must be lying about a sexual assault, and then we have to protect the accused. So really had the standards much higher, the process much more onerous. We even, under the DeVos rules, even limited where this action could happen. If you were off campus, didn't count. If you were at a campus trip that was elsewhere and something happened, didn't count under DeVos rules. If you were in an overseas program for a semester and were being harassed by your professor or TA, didn't count. So a lot of that changed with the Biden rules that came out in 2024. And I've got to say, incredibly frustrating that the Biden administration took almost 4 whole years to do this, because I think it allowed itself to become the political football that it did. As Robyn mentioned, the Biden rules came out in April of 2024. They had a very fast implementation date of August of 2024, and almost immediately had lawsuits filed. And then suddenly in September, we were looking at really different situations depending on what state you lived in. And in some cases, even what school you went to, if you were at a school covered by Moms for Liberty members. So we suddenly, just this past fall, found Title IX protections to be a patchwork, which at the end of the day, Title IX is a promise to everybody, and it's meant to be a floor, not a ceiling of protections, but we really started to see some erosions in the fall. But Robyn, anything you would add to that, though?
No, I think you covered that very well. The other thing that happened in June of 2020 was a Title VII case, and I'm not trying to confuse people. Title VII is a different statute, but it prevents discrimination because of sex in the workplace. So it's an employment law, federal employment law. And in June of 2020, the Supreme Court surprisingly came down with a decision that said that if you discriminated against someone because they were gay or because they were transgender, that was discrimination because of sex. And the way the laws, because they're not the exact same words, in terms of Title IX and Title VII, but they've always been interpreted that because of sex and on the basis of sex has always meant the same thing in terms of the way the laws are interpreted. So what the Biden administration did, because that decision came down in June of 2020, still under the Trump administration, but President Biden soon took over, is that they used that Bostock, it's Bostock versus Clayton County was the name of the decision. They used that decision to say, this is going to be the basis for us saying that LGBTQ people are protected under Title IX. So that was the other important factor that happened in June of 2020 that was the underpinning for the Biden administration to go ahead and revoke the divorce rules and proceed the way they did. Now, I mean, Bostock versus Clayton County is still the law of the land. It's still what Title VII says, and it's not been reversed. And the Supreme Court has not said that it doesn't apply in a Title IX situation, but we're all collectively holding our breath to see what's going to happen.
And there have been cases in the past 4 years where courts have been leaning in the direction of transgender students being covered. It's just gotten very patchwork-esque right now. But I also want to underscore what Robyn just said, is that it's the current members of the Supreme Court. It wasn't a previous version of the Supreme Court. It's our current members of the Supreme Court said that sex discrimination in a workplace based on gender or gender identity or sexual orientation also was sex discrimination. And I think that we're going to see that coming up and being questioned again.
One small caveat, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still on the court for Bostock. And as I said, kind of tongue in cheek when you asked me the first question, depends on minute to minute almost. Before we came on the air, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is California, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, I believe, struck or affirmed an Idaho statute that banned transgender girls from using bathrooms and locker rooms in accordance with their gender identity, and did so both on a constitutional basis. They said it wasn't a violation of equal protection, and on a Title IX basis. So, to Megan's point, it's a patchwork. We don't know where we are because there's another decision in the same circuit that kind of went the other way. So nobody knows what the law is, and unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until the Supreme Court speaks. And I mean, yes, we had a very good decision in Bostock versus Clayton County, but I don't know that anybody feels terribly optimistic about the current Supreme Court. So,
and Anjali, I really will let you ask the questions, but I did want to.
Go ahead, no worries.
But to the point that this has been changing so much. So getting us back to the 2025 and the court case in Kentucky that vacated the 2024 rules. When that first happened, nobody knew what version of rules we were going back to.
Right.
And there was about a week that there was not clarity. Were we going back to 1972, 1985? And then there finally was some guidance saying that we were going back to 2020 and the divorce rules. But that took about a week of back and forth. And I don't even think the department didn't have a head yet. I mean, this was pre-inauguration. There was still a tremendous amount of confusion. So things have been moving quite rapidly on all of this.
So I'm going to comment on something that one of you said, and also I think Megan brought up the fact that this is a floor, not the ceiling, right? Because I think as we talk about, we're talking about patchworks, we're talking about, different states, and we're talking about, possibly what states can do. So this is now I'm going back a while too. I think it was 2019 or 2020. I was at a symposium hosted by Rutgers Law on this very topic. And what struck me then was the difference really between, what the Obama guidance was in terms of protections, but also process and what it looked like on a campus actually with a Title IX coordinator and the reporting of, sexual assault and harassment versus sort of the legal process, right? Because I remember being in one of the pillars I felt of that Obama guidance was that the Title IX office, when a student came in with a report, did not necessarily have to go to the police. They gave options. They basically told the student, these are what all your options are. You can choose to go to the police. If you don't, these are still what we can do for you. So we can provide, counseling. If there was a student maybe that was being harassed by a student in a class, maybe you can change sections, things like that, like other sort of options to make that student more comfortable in their educational environment without actually, seeking the protection of the law. And I remember being in that room and a lot of people being very sort of offended, like, why wouldn't you want to go to the police? Like, you want to report everything to the police. This is why we don't have, good stats and, assaults and things like that. But from an educational institution's point of view, what really struck me was, their primary concern was that we want to create a safe environment for our students. Whether they choose to go to the police or not, we want to ensure the safety and the mental health and the protections for those students. And I think that's what's notable about the DeVos rules is that they seek to take that safety away. That idea of a safe environment, a student can come forward and, report what took place.
Anjali, I do want to mention something. I have spent a lot of time working in victim services, and even with the Biden rules, there was a lot of concern and questions from student-focused communities about mandated reporting or not. And I hear what you're saying, that these issues are so underreported.
Right.
But when we're thinking of like being from a trauma-informed perspective, we don't want to push anyone into reporting. And especially now that we're back to an investigation process, that can be very traumatic. So from an advocate perspective, like from a policy perspective, I would love to have better data.
Right.
And from a survivor experience, that's kind of where we are. I don't want to leap ahead too much, but that's kind of where we are right now, is that people really do need to be very judicious about what Title IX claims they'll be bringing up, because there's a lot of fear right now about how those will be handled in a variety of ways.
The other issue that I just point out, just from an administrator, a school administrator's perspective, is that mandatory reporting to the police can cut off the ability to do the administrative investigation, because now you have police involvement. Someone has constitutional rights. They don't have to, they can keep themselves and protect themselves in terms of that investigation. And so, again, from an administrator standpoint, sometimes the criminal investigation can inhibit the speedy process of trying to get to the bottom of what took place.
And that's, I think, where what is Title IX and what does it mean to students who are unfortunately experiencing one of these types of situations is this is a challenge. There's no perfect solution. There's definitely no one size fits all for even the best Title IX enforcement. because there are some folks who it would be great if they could be in, something has been so appalling that we might wish there was absolutely that there was legal action. And yet by allowing the schools to have some flexibility, but be kept accountable. Like that's been the challenge. School needs to have, it is really helpful for school to have flexibility that maybe the students, that maybe the student involved does just want a shift of schedule, does want something, a different type of accommodation. But we need to hold the schools accountable so that they don't continue to ignore cases that are happening on a regular basis. And then when you have a really pervasive environment of sexual harassment or sex-based harassment.
So I believe schools are required to report, right, the number of cases, uh, if I remember correctly, in order to receive federal funding. That is something that they're required to report every year.
That is probably more under the Clery Act.
Yeah.
But if you look at Clery Act reports, it's impressive. It's impressive how crime-free our campuses are. And I've got to hand it to them. I'm impressed because, word of mouth is saying this is a very different experience. 1 in 3 women experiences a sexual assault on campus. Campuses have a name for it. It's called the red zone between when you get onto campus in August and Thanksgiving break.
For freshmen, yeah.
For freshmen, and that's where there's an increased number of sexual assaults because you've got an incredibly vulnerable population. But apparently that's just a myth because according to Clery Act reports, very little sexual assault and harassment is happening on college campus. Fantastic side note.
So I do actually want to go back to sports for a second because I think even in the Biden, rules or the Biden things that were put out last year, I think one of the disappointments, I think of AUW and a lot of the advocacy organizations was that in fact it did not go far enough because it did not actually have stated protections for trans athletes. And as we have seen nationwide, I mean, I think on the first day that this administration took office, I mean, that was target number one, the transgender community, but specifically, attacking student athletes, right? And we've seen that with the NCAA, in fact, pulling back and saying that they are not going to ban transgender athletes on female sport teams. Even though, as in the email that I sent around for this webinar, I noted that the president himself said that of the 500,000 plus athletes that play college sports, less than 10 are actually transgender. So this is another situation where we've seen attacks from the far right that basically take a small group of marginalized people and create news about them, right? So I want to talk to both of you and ask both, I mean, about the fear. I mean, Robyn, for sure, what that feels like. And from Meghan, like, what do we see as the future? Do we see lawsuits? What do we see happening? I'll go to Robyn first.
Okay, so in terms of trans athletes, as you said, the president of the NCAA in testimony before Congress said that of all the student athletes in the NCAA, less than 10 were transgender athletes. In the state of New Jersey, the NJSIAA, which is for high school athletics, has had a policy allowing students to participate in sports in accordance with their gender identity since 2009. There have been 0 complaints. If you ask people, state legislatures who have been passing these bills since 2020, if you ask them, who are the transgender athletes that you're trying to ban, they don't even know if they have any. This has nothing to do with athletics. This has nothing to do with protecting women or girls. This is a political agenda where they are trying to gin up a base to go against a very small, as you said, a very small marginalized population. I mean, transgender people in general are less than 1% of the population. And yet this is the focus, it was the focus of the election. It was the focus of his executive orders. As you said, on day one, he signed the executive order. And then on February 5th, he signed an order that's entitled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports. I'm all for that. I'm all for keeping men out of women's sports. I'm all for keeping men out of women's rooms. Uh, I'm a trans woman. I'm a woman. Trans athletes, if you're a trans boy, you're a boy. If you're a trans girl, you're a girl. And this has nothing to do with athletics or protecting people. It has to do with firing people up against the community because we're an easy target. If you look at the statistics, I mean, if you say to people, name a transgender athlete, everybody will go, oh, Leah Thomas, University of Pennsylvania. Okay, who's next? They can't because it's just, it's a problem and it's an issue, and that's not a problem. It's a solution in search of a problem. So I note that today the Trump administration, the Department of Education, has come down and found that Maine, because of their high school transgender policy, has violated Title IX, and they're threatening enforcement action against them. And you might also have seen that the Trump administration took away millions of dollars from the University of Pennsylvania, again, because of Leah Thomas, who I don't think has competed in like 3 years. So again, I know I'm on my soapbox, and I apologize a little bit for that, but I it's just it's not a problem.
Oh, I'll jump right up on that soapbox with you. I mean, this is a solution in searching for political points. That's it.
Yeah.
I also want to share, and I realize that there are people in different levels of understanding of what it means to be transgender, and that is not my personal experience, but something I want to that I do want people to know, since I've got policy in my work title. Policies based on actively trying to discriminate against a group of somebody that we're creating the other, they're not good for anybody. And in states where there have been, so going back before the current executive orders, last year, the year before, when we were looking at high school athletics programs, if you looked at the states that had transgender athlete bans, you had lower participation in girls' sports overall. So this is not just transgender girls, but it's also cisgender girls who are being harmed by this, because we're creating an environment of exclusion. There's also been incidents. Last January, there was a young white woman in Utah, and some choose my words carefully. There was a member of the school board who decided to question her gender publicly on social media. And the family received threats. This was a cisgender girl, but quite frankly, none of anybody's business, right? So the attorney general in Texas, he's suing the NCAA because the NCAA, because he wants anybody participating in women's sports. There needs to be some proof. He doesn't say what this proof is, but we're starting to go in the opposite direction of Title IX. And instead of creating inclusive environments where women and girls are supported, that they are not excluded, we're weaponizing Title IX. What we're seeing right now is a weaponization of Title IX. And I saw a question about, what evidence is there that white males have been actively discriminated against? There isn't, but the argument that has been popping up is, well, if you make me feel bad, then that is harassment. And I will say it's a weird bit of jujitsu with the language. There's language that I think we would all agree on. Like Robyn said, you don't want men in women's bathrooms, but that's not what's happening. So I think that we're seeing the language getting really twisted, and this is not in an effort to create a more inclusive and equitable situation for people. It's really to force other people out.
And I think Meghan makes a great point in terms of how do you enforce a transgender ban? What do cisgender girls have to do to prove that they're cisgender? And nobody knows.
Yeah.
Is there inspections that they have to go through? Do they have to have gynecological exams? I mean, nobody can put their finger on how we enforce these bans, and yet they are proliferating all over the place.
Exactly right. And I mean, I think when I think about it, I mean, I can see any girl that is too tall, too muscular, has a hormonal condition that, causes her to have facial hair. I see all of those situations where, they're going to be questioned, right? And when we look at some of our star athletes from the past, I can see a lot of them, for example, and we've seen that. We've seen, Brittany Griner face questions. We've seen I'm sure, the Venus and Serena, the Williams sisters, have faced questions. And that's, it's going to just read, you said, I mean, what does that look like? And it's just going to be discrimination. And in the end, it is going to prevent a lot of those girls from participating in sports. They are going to be, thinking about, is this even worth it? And and the other thing that I do want to point out, like a lot of the times I get questions about, I'm a friend of the trans community, like I'm an ally, but even I don't agree about this. I get that a lot.
Mhm.
And because they seem to think it's about fairness in sports. And
Were you
my
talking to
answer is
Governor
always,
Newsom
there
about
is
that?
no fairness in sports. That tall athlete who's that basketball champion, like, yeah, I mean, I think all throughout the history of sports, there have been athletes who have had, whatever things that they were born with that gave them undue advantage. So this idea that sports is something fair, that we need to keep it that way, is a false premise to start with.
I think,
Um, I always use the example with her permission, and Meghan, you'll enjoy this because you were a soccer player. I have a daughter, and she played soccer right through college, and she's about 5'1". Her best friend on the soccer team was 6'1". They're not, they had different skill sets and they brought different things to the table in terms of their abilities. And that, as you were saying, is the nature of competition. People have different attributes that make them good at one thing and not as good at another, and somebody else is better at that. So, yeah.
and it's important to remember Title IX was not about creating competitive situations. It was never about creating an opportunity for women to compete in sports. That was a really clever use of Title IX, and it's been very successful. But it's also now being used as a way to unwind strong Title IX protections. And Robyn was mentioning Title VII and employment law. We talk about Title IX. I mean, Title IX is one of several civil rights provisions that apply to schools in the education environment. And I mean, it's Title IX for sex-based, and I have to catch myself and not call it gender because of those foolish EOs. But Title IX is sex-based. Title VI is race-based discrimination. Schools also have to have an entire set of rules there, and we've been seeing a lot of effort to undermine that. Section 504, and as well as Americans with Disabilities Act, cover students with disabilities. All of these are being eroded, and even just in the past couple of weeks, with the guidance that's come out from the Department of Education from the Office of Civil Rights, sex-based and race-based discrimination cases are frozen right now, and only the disability cases are allowed to go forward. So we're watching an erosion. I don't think it's permanent, but it's certainly going to be impactful for the current group of women women and girls in school.
Right. In the interest of time, I do want to keep the conversation going, but if anybody has questions, raise your hand or put it in the Q&A and we will try to answer them. I don't see any questions outstanding in the Q&A right now. I'm going to ask Meghan to talk briefly about some of the Title IX protections that the Biden administration put in for pregnant and parenting students. And I know that one of the things that AUW is talking about is how, because the Kentucky judge did not actually rule on those, that maybe there is some room for either court cases or some way to keep those rules.
Well, so right now, because of the Kentucky judge, those rules are not enforceable. But what happened, what was in the 2024 Biden rules was actually a very well articulated set of guidance or set of rules that schools were to follow about being proactive when they find out a student is pregnant or parenting, proactively. And this is completely different than the sexual assault perspective. You want the schools to proactively tell students what is available to them, what accommodations are allowed, what can be there. And really had a lot of very specific scenarios, a lot of specific examples to really help schools put this forward. No, this was not the part of the Title IX rules that got attention in the courts, but the reason we keep talking about this Kentucky court in January was they vacated the entire thing, including that piece. So a couple of things to know. One, just 2 weeks ago, I've lost all track of time. I'm going in dog years right now. That there has been a case filed specifically to reinstate that portion of the 2024 rules. And where AAUW is part of a Pregnant and Parenting Students Coalition, and we're looking at putting together a toolkit that individuals can share with their local school districts and encourage the school district to adopt that component, because the school can, without violating anything, incorporate that into their own policies. So a lot of work is being done right now on the back end to see if we can salvage that piece of the Title IX rules, while some of the other pieces remain going back and forth in the court.
Thank you. I always like to, I never like to leave one of these without some kind of action item, right? So I'm just going to pop my screen up once again to share an action item, and then we'll come back to close, okay? So as we all know, and we talked about this at the beginning of the show a little bit, that the assaults on education seem to be daily. And of course, the latest one today is that the Trump administration, or rather, Trump himself has issued an executive order dismantling the Department of Education. So as we're talking about Title IX and we're talking about these attacks on higher education, AUW has, we do something that we call the 2-Minute Activist, which is basically a website that you can go to, a link that you can go to. When you go there, it automatically, if you enter your name, your address, it populates it with letters that will be sent to your 2 senators and your congressman, your representative to the House of Representatives. And it gives you a form letter, but then you can obviously edit it before you hit send. So I highly, highly recommend and encourage everybody to do this today. You can go to this link. It's bit.ly, bit.ly, AUW-protect higher ed. I'm going to put this in the chat too in a second, so that, we can, I mean, I don't think we have a choice at this point. We just have to fight back. So Having said that, I do want to get back and talk a little bit about how we fight back.
I was gonna say, do you want to pose that to either one of us? I was gonna say, Robyn, I feel like I'm talking a lot, so
No, you go first. Go ahead.
I mean, there are a couple I was thinking about this before we came on, and I think one of the things that we need to do is first and foremost be informed and fight back information, or fight back misinformation, and not let the misinformation stick. Uh, for example, Robyn mentioned at the beginning, right? Like, yeah, there's an executive order. It doesn't have the force of law. There are laws on the books. Now, the enforcement of and the implementation of those laws are really being impacted by a large portion of the staffing cuts at the Department of Ed this last week. They disproportionately impacted the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Ed, and that's the office that enforces and investigates Title IX claims. So first, we need to be informed. So thank you for everybody being here. We need to make sure that people understand that, especially students, that they do have rights under Title IX. And there's some great organizations that have that are student focused. One of them is Know Your Nine, and they do direct advocacy in terms of training students what rights are still available, even under the DeVos rules. Title IX didn't go away. It's just limited. We need to support the students who are not being protected right now and finding other ways to be doing that and being good allies. And yes, I am always one for, we absolutely need to keep talking to Congress, because Congress needs to appropriate the money, needs to remind themselves that they are a co-equal branch of government. And I have to believe that that will happen at some point in time. The co-equal branch of government will stand up, but they need to be pushed, and they need to be pushed by their constituents.
The things that I would say, in addition to what Meghan has said, is keep yourself informed. And social media is not necessarily the best place to be informed, even when you're reading what you want to read. So many times you read something, you go, oh my goodness, that's outrageous. How could he have done that? And then you find out he didn't do that, that somebody has just taken something that they saw on the internet and ran with it. So keep yourself informed. I recommend to all people, in terms of the transgender issues, to follow a woman by the name of Erin Reed. Erin Reed is a journalist. She has a Substack. It's called Erin in the Morning. She is, in my humble opinion, the best journalist out there reporting on transgender issues. As I said, the Ninth Circuit decision that came down this afternoon, I learned of it at 20 after 6 this evening before we came on, because she posted it like 10 minutes after the decision came down. So keep yourself informed. Be good allies. I mean, that's important. I mean, again, as a member of the transgender community, we're a small community, and on the 31st of this month, March 31st, is Transgender Day of Visibility. And so many trans people now are afraid to be visible because it's not safe to be out there and have your face out there. So be visible for them, support them, support trans people, support all the entire LGBTQ community, and become active in organizations like this, like Garden State Equality, like, any other ones. Become an activist or follow them, because they will tell you when they're going to be meeting at a state house or at a congressperson's office to protest. So keep informed, keep active, be good allies, and then, in addition to what Meghan said, push your Congress people. Don't be afraid to call some Republican congressperson, even if they're not yours. Flood their phones, because they really do pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah, and as Anjali said, I mean, you've all seen them. AUW has the letters that are pre-populated for you. Mix them up. Tell folks what's going on in your part of New Jersey. Like, let them know what you care about. We're just giving you a starting point, and picking up the phone, We just had a recess. There's a 2-week recess coming back up in April. Great time to talk to folks. And the Republicans need to hear this. And it empowers people. It's really empowering when you see somebody standing up for somebody who doesn't look like you, who you don't share the same background. So when we can be allies, we have to be allies. We can't say AUW can't say we're for equity for women and be choosy about it.
So I have been putting some resources in the chat. The first one we talked about, how we think that, again, going back to we talked about it's a patchwork, and then there's things you can do at the state level. New York actually has a law called the Enough is Enough law, and they have a really good website. So I put that in the chat, which talks about what they have done to protect, to extend the protections under Title IX on their campuses. And you can learn about it more on that. And that is actually something that AUW NJ is now exploring on bringing to New Jersey in a similar format, legislation, basically. I've also put the link for the 2-minute activist that we talked about and mentioned, and Meghan mentioned an organization called Know Your Nine. So I put in the links for Know Your Nine. And also they have a really good playbook that tells you what you can do in your state and where your state stands. So I put a link to that. And the last one is the Substack that Robyn mentioned, the Erin in the Morning. So all of those are available in the chat, and then we'll try to send it out also in an email follow-up for this webinar. Thanks, everybody. A great conversation today. We talk about how, it seems really dark, let's face it, not just in this country, but, in generally, I think globally, right? So what is one thing that keeps you going? What keeps you inspired? I'm going to go to Robyn first, and then we'll end with Meghan.
For me, as I said earlier, I'm older, and so what keeps me going is the energy of the young people in this country. I think, I am a trans woman of a certain generation where most people didn't even know what that meant, and it was a hard time, dealing with things. But as I watch the younger generations come along, they are so much more accepting than my generation was and things like that. So I take hope and I have optimism in the future because of the younger generations.
Oh, Robyn, you would have loved my summer interns.
So before I go to you, Meghan, I just wanted to give a shout out to Garden State Equality because they actually did a lobby day this week on Monday at the State House, and they brought 100 people with them, and a lot of them were young college students that came out to lobby, both for, I think it was for reproductive rights and for LGBTQ rights. So that was a great initiative. Meghan?
I think it is being in community with folks, because I know that folks are there's been somewhat of a despair that has settled in on people, and I think it's a matter of when people can find, even if it's just one thing that they can do. Is it being a good ally? Is it showing up to a school board meeting? It is, where can we lend our voice and support? Because then we're going to see other people actually are like-minded, and then you can realize that at a time where sometimes it feels like, I feel like there's this wall of hate that is has not only been exposed but has been encouraged. We can fight back, and we can't just retreat. We can't just retreat and crawl under the covers. So being in spaces, Robyn, I feel like we could talk for hours about some of this stuff and stand up on our soapboxes together. And I think we need to find the people that we can stand up on soapboxes with. And so thank you for bringing us together.
And I would just add one last thing to Megan's. I gave a talk the other night, and I just said, love can conquer fear. And as Meghan said, what they're trying to do is put us in fear, and we just have to stay together, love each other, and we can conquer this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to end with, Robyn talked about this briefly, that, as being a trans person right now is very, very scary. So when we talk about allyship, I think it's important that we do more than that. I always say, don't be an ally, be an accomplice. So as you know, instead of waiting for the person that is being attacked or being harmed to speak out and then support them, I think we need to take the place for them. And we should not be afraid of being harmed ourselves, because I think that, as again somebody mentioned, that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping to rule by fear, and we have to stand up and we have to be fearless, and we have to not be afraid to speak up. So thank you again. Thank you for this great conversation. And as both of you said, we could have gone on for another hour, but I do want to respect all our attendees' time. So we're a few minutes over, but I think this is an hour well spent. Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Take care, everyone.